Hey everyone, welcome, it's Smythepants Chess, hope you're doing well, and today I want to look at game 7 between Stockfish and Leela in the Superfinal TCEC 17, and one of these is actually my favourite opening. So in this game Stockfish is playing white, Leela is playing black, and we get into what's called the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So this goes e4, e5, knight c3, knight to f6, and bishop c4, and here black takes on e4. Queen h5 threatens mate on f7, so knight d6 is played to defend the pawn and attack the bishop at the same time. The bishop retreats to b3, knight c6 is played to defend the e5 pawn, and then knight to b5, trying to drive this knight away on d6 from the protection of f7. So then g6 is played to hit the queen on h5. The queen retreats to f3, maintaining this threat on f7, and then f5 is played by Leela. And this is the end of the book. So from here on in, it's both the computers playing the moves. And Stockfish plays the book move, queen d5, again threatening mate on f7, and again this knight tries to drive this d6 knight away from the protection of f7. So queen f6 is played to defend the f7 square. However, the queen moving away from the square now leaves the defence of the c7 pawn open, and Stockfish takes. Knight takes c7 with a fork. So king d8 to move the king away, and knight takes a8, and Leela plays b6. And this actually is all theory. So basically white's just won the exchange, but black has a really great attack coming, and this is a really double-edged position. I played it on the receiving end as white many times, and I've looked at the theory behind this, and usually white can take on b6 here. Knight takes b6, a takes b6 is the main move, queen f3, bishop b7, and the main idea now for white is to hide the queen in the corner on queen h3. Just because black's got an immense attack coming, jumping these knights into these squares, pushing all these pawns up, and basically white's job is just to ride out the storm, and if they can ride out the storm they should be in a good position to win the game, because they have the extra material. So Stockfish does what all the computers do now, which is play queen to f3. This is the main move now. Knight d4 is played to hit the queen from Leela, and Stockfish hides the queen in the corner on h3. Now I've usually played other moves as white here, and I've got absolutely crushed in a few games, but over the years I've learned to play this queen f3, queen h3 idea, and it seems to be the best thing to play. Now typically here black usually plays bishop b7 to hit the knights on a8, and white can play c3, and if knight to e6, d4, e takes d4, and finally white should just take this pawn on b6, and after a takes b takes, the computer recommendation is to play knight to e2, and white seems to have ridden out the storm quite well. They've given back some material, but they've got nice development, and they don't really have any issues anymore. So in this game though, Leela played the move f4, so basically they don't feel the need to rush this bishop b7 because the knight's just hanging there anyway. So Stockfish continues with c3, hitting the knight on d4. Knight takes b3, a takes b3 is just really good for white because then the rook is unleashed on the a file. So after c3, Leela drops the knight back to c6, and Stockfish plays d3. So stopping black from pushing this pawn further, and just trying to develop the bishop on c1. Leela now plays h5, so trying to create a pawn storm, and it's probably about time Stockfish moved the queen away, so they play queen f3, and Leela continues with their pawn storm, and Stockfish thinks it's good to hide their queen away onto the d1 square, which seems quite satisfactory. So again it's just a matter of white riding out this storm. Bishop a6 is played, developing another piece of black, and white also develops with knight to e2. Now how should black proceed here? I looked at f3, however I think white can just take this, and after queen takes they have knight g3. After a trade, bishop takes, bishop b7, knight takes b6, a takes b6, bishop takes g5. It is just good for white. There's still the exchange up, and actually are also two pawns up. So in this position Leela continued with her attack, h4. Stockfish now played h3, stopping the g4 push. We're just trying to lock down the position on the king side. If Stockfish can lock down the position, they should be in a good position to win the endgame. e4 by Leela. Now after e4, I think d takes e4 is perfectly possible here. After knight takes e4, white could play bishop d5. After bishop takes e2, they can take with the king or the queen. If the queen takes, it could be a bit messy after knight takes c3. Pawn takes, queen takes with check, queen d2, and queen takes a1. But the computers actually give the evaluation as about +3 or +2 here for white, so the computers really favour white in this variation. If king takes e2, then again after queen e5, king f1, king c8, white just survives this variation with bishop takes e4, queen takes and then queen to e2, queen d5 and bishop d2. If black goes after the knight, then white can still win a pawn. Knight takes b6, a takes b6, c4, queen f7 and bishop c3, and white has survived, and you have to say they're going to win the endgame from here on in. So even though the Frankenstein-Dracula is a double-edged weapon, the computers actually really favour white in this variation. So after e4 by black, Stockfish castles kingside, and again I looked at f3 here. If g takes f3, e takes f3, white still survives with knight to d4, takes, c takes, bishop to b7, and white can just go rook e1. If black takes back the knight, bishop d2, let's say g4, trying to attack white, but queen c1, threatening to play bishop g5 is just fine. If the bishop h6, rook e5 is also good. And I tried to continue the attack as black here with g3, but still bishop g5, takes, and g2, rook e1. Just fine for white. White's just going to play maybe d5 and rook e3 to win this f3 pawn. Yeah, and again white has survived black's onslaught. But after castles, Leela played bishop takes d3, Stockfish played bishop c2. The bishop went back, probably going to play bishop b7 now at some point. After a4, bishop b7, and now a5. So Leela took this off, bishop to a4 was played, bishop takes a8, and then Stockfish played b4, attacking the knight. If the knight jumps into c4, then actually quite an interesting variation is just bishop takes d7, because if the king takes it, rook takes a7, attacks the bishop on a8, and if bishop b7, then just rook takes because the knight on d6 is pinned by the queen. So after b4, knight c6 was played, and Stockfish just traded bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, and then played knight to d4, threatening to take the bishop on c6, which goes into d5. Now rook takes a7 probably could have been played here as well. After knight c8, rook a4, bishop d6, rook e1. If black tries g4, white can maybe try knight to b5, attacking the bishop on d5. If queen g5, white just has queen takes g4. After a trade, bishop to e5, rook to a3, h3, takes, and c4, takes. Suddenly white's actually fine again. They've got the exchange up and equal pawns, and the knight does a great job of protecting the c4 pawn for the time being. But instead of takes on a7, Stockfish has played queen g4, just locking down the king side, and it's probably a little bit too late now for black here. Knight c8 was played to defend the pawn, rook d1 was played to unleash the rook on the d file, rook h6 from Leela, bishop b2 connecting the two rooks on the back rank, bishop c4, and now b5. So b5 may be having some ideas of knight c6 check here because the d pawn will be pinned by this rook, so that's quite a nice threat. Rook h7 was played, and of course, yeah, Stockfish was going for this knight c6 check idea. King c7, and Stockfish just takes on a7. I don't think black wants to trade knights, so they play knight to d6. But then bishop to a3, and rook f7. So if we just take a pause for a second, to be honest, black's position just looks like an absolute mess here. White's pieces just invested black's position, and basically it's a matter of trading off material now. So bishop takes d6 by Stockfish, bishop takes d6 by Leela, and Stockfish plays a cheeky knight c6. If pawn takes the knight, rook a7 can be played, and this is dire straits for black, because if king b8 here, then rook check, king takes, and queen c8 finishes the job after king a7, rook a1 check. Basically the two bishops have to block, and then it's checkmate. After this rook a7, if king to d8, then there's rook a8 to finish the job with king e7, and queen c8 threatening to play queen to d8. If queen e5, then just queen takes c6, and if king f6 here, then rook takes d6 is just winning a piece. And if f3, to try and continue the attack, again rook takes d6, queen takes d6 and rook e8, king f6 and queen takes queen, just a win for white. So after this knight c6 move, very clever by Stockfish, black's in a lot of trouble. They played bishop takes b5 from Leela, the knight jumps back in to d4, Leela puts the bishop onto d3. So okay, it looks actually quite even at the moment. Basically black's got a bishop and 2 pawns for the rook. However, black's king now is just really under threat. Rook a7 was played, king to d8, rook to a8 and then king to e7. And finally Stockfish just locks down the position with f3. And there's no way that black can move his e-pawn because then rook takes the bishop will be played. So Leela continued with bishop c5, pinning a knight on d4. But now Stockfish just calmly dismantles black's position with rook to g8, threatening to take on g5. If bishop takes d4 here, c takes d4, rook g7, white will trade and could play queen to f5. And after that, queen takes d4, just play king h2 to hide the king. And if black plays queen to c5, then queen h7 check, king d8 and take on e4. And I've given here that white has an edge, but it's actually not so easy because black still has 2 pawns and a bishop for the rook here. And I looked at this with a computer here with queen to e5. And for instance, I'll just show you why white has to be careful in this variation, because if rook takes d3, then f3 check just leads to a draw with a perpetual. Let's say king g1, queen c5, king h2, queen e5, king h1 and queen a1. And black's just going to continually check the white king. So yeah, in this variation, white does have to be a bit careful, and to be honest, it probably could be a draw in this variation. So maybe black should have played bishop takes d4 here instead of rook to g7. But anyway, Leela did play rook g7, rook c8 was played, bishop takes d4, pawn takes d4. Now I looked at queen takes d4 here, but I don't think it's that good for black, because after king h1, the king's actually really safe. And for instance, if the queen went back to f6 here, f takes e4 is really strong, because they have threats like if bishop takes it, rook takes d7 is checkmate. And if bishop b5, then just queen f3 is absolutely fine for white, and actually has locked down the position on the king side and sells the 2 rooks. So in the game, Leela played queen g6 instead, white took on e4, the queen took on e4, and then queen h5 was played. The black queen checked the king, the king moved to h2, queen g3 check, and then Stockfish hid their king in the corner. But Leela did try, she played f3, threatening mate on g2. But now there's just a trade, the queen takes a pawn, queen takes, pawn takes, and bishop to b5. Again though, if this was a human versus human, I think that black may have a chance of a draw here. But Stockfish is just super strong in these type of positions, and they just win a pawn, rook b8, rook f7, check, king d6, and then rook takes b6 with check, bishop to block it, and then just king to g2. So now they've got 3 pawns each, but white still has the exchange up. If black takes his pawn, rook takes f3, then actually it loses to rook takes c6, king takes c6, and then just king takes the rook, and this is an easy win for white. So in the game, Leela played rook f4, but now rook e4 was played, offering the trade of rooks. Rook f5, the rook went back, and rook to d5, rook to b4 to protect the pawn. Leela put the rook on a5, rook b2 to stop any checks, and after rook d5, rook d2. White's got their rooks in the optimum position behind the d pawn. Again, rook f5 was played, rook to d3, rook f4, king went to f2, bishop to d5, and now basically just a lot of manoeuvring. Rook e4 offering again the trade of rooks, rook went to f5, and white doubled rooks. Bishop d5 from Leela to attack the rook on e4, which went back to e3 to defend the f3 square, rook f4, and rook g1, offering the trade of pawns here. So if rook takes d4, white will take on g5. Instead though, Leela kept the pawns on, but then just comes rook g4, and now this rook is really nicely placed. King c6 was played, and finally Stockfish opens up the position with f4, offering the trade. So if g takes f4, rook c3 will be played, king d6, and rook takes h4 will be played. Instead though, Leela took with the rook, rook takes, and there was a trade of rooks. The rook went to e5, bishop went to e6. And that was an interesting move from Stockfish, d5 with check, so forcing the bishop to take it, and then just rook h5, king d6, and Stockfish just picks up the outside pawn, and now has a passed h pawn, and the rook is just superior in this kind of endgame. The king went to f5, the rook went to g1, cuts off the king, bishop to e4, and now just launches the pawn up the board. Rook g8, king e5, and now just pushes the pawn even further. h6, king f7, check, king f8, king to e2, and d5. But this position now is not so easy, and white still has to be a bit careful. I actually mucked it up when I went through it in my analysis. So king d2 was played by Stockfish, the bishop went to f5, king to e1, bishop to d3, and white just has to be very patient and make black run out of moves basically. King f2, bishop to e4, king e2 and d4. So there's no way for the king to actually enter and attack these two pawns at the moment. But rook g4 was played, bishop c2, and here white has to be careful. Now it was here possible for white to take this. Rook takes f4, king g8, rook takes d4 and win the pawns. But after bishop to b1, I think white will still win this endgame, but it's cutting it close to be quite honest, and it will probably take some time for white to clear this up. Instead though, king f2 was played, king f7, and rook to g7 check. If the king went to f8, white can play rook c7, hitting the bishop, and if bishop f5, then h7, forcing black to take the pawn, and rook takes h7 would win the game. However, king f6 was played instead, but white still has this under control with rook c7, d3, and now h7, d2, and white gets a queen with check, king g6, and after a few more moves, white delivers checkmate with queen h5. So this was a very double-edged game between Stockfish and Leela, but the Frankenstein-Dracula is also a double-edged position, but I think it often favours whites, to be quite honest. And Stockfish certainly did a great job of just stopping black's attack and just cleaning up in the endgame. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this game, and I hope you're all staying safe at home. I'll be back soon with another game between Stockfish and Leela in the Season 17 Superfinal. There's really not much in it between these two engines. Anyway, see you next time.